Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone here and online who may be joining us. Thanks for coming today. So I'm going to talk about a recent project of mine, and it's building off of a number of other things that I've been doing over the past few years, sort of coming in a series of projects having to do with outer space. So in the past, I've done projects that have dealt with sending fragments of my transgender hormone medications to the International Space Station, and then also exploring how we can transform ourselves in terms of genetic engineering as a transgender person so that I could make my own hormones on a long-duration space mission. But this particular project sort of departs from a different perspective. So it's in conjunction with a residency that I did last year called Repairing the Present with the START's residency with Art Hub Copenhagen. And my particular challenge was dealing with decolonizing Mars. And this is sort of a big issue these days because there are these phrases that are thrown around without sort of any question at all. So we talk about lunar colonies, Mars colonies, space colonies, and so on and so forth. And SpaceX even sells t-shirts, Occupy Mars. Now, this is a problem, even if there are not, as far as we know, any humans or other extraterrestrial sentient life on these planets or the moon or so forth. And this is set out very well in this recent book by Fred Sharman entitled Space Forces, A Critical History of Life in Outer Space. And this book is really good if you're interested in sort of the histories of how we've thought about sending humans to space and so forth. But as he writes in this book, and this is a quote, "Colonization is another very particular kind of planetary scale imagination. The phrase space colony is often used uncritically without implications of the second term in it. If the fraught history of colonization on Earth is considered at all, it's usually dismissed in the next breath. Proponents of the term space colony point out that in uninhabited outer space, there are no pre-existing people to be colonized. However, this is a narrow view of the historical processes of colonization. Besides the displacement and subjugation of indigenous people, colonization is a matter of forcible redirection of whole systems of social life, biology, politics, and material infrastructure." And so this is very important because what he's talking about is colonization is not only the practice of, say, displacing other entities, what happened on Earth in terms of other humans, but it's also about how it radically mutates in a very horrible way our imagination and what we imagine to be possible. So really, thinking about colonization these days in space has to do with resource exploitation. So these are actually existing images from various companies that are thinking about asteroid mining. So Planetary Resources, Asteroid Mining Corporation. And this is all due to sort of this desire to create a $1 trillion industry in outer space, as they call it. So this project that I was doing with Art Hub and Decolonizing Mars was really thinking about decolonization or the post-colonial, right? And this is something that I think is important for all of us to be thinking about because it's not only something about dealing with the reparations that are needed to deal with the histories of colonization, but also the ways in which colonization has radically changed our imagination and what we imagine to be possible. And so I've created a number of works having to do with this. One of them, this is a screenshot from a panoramic film that I created. But I put this up here at this moment in the presentation because on the far right is Buzz Aldrin, the second person on the moon, wearing a shirt that says, "Get your ass to Mars." So this sort of infiltrates all levels of thinking about going to space. And so for the project that I created something called TX2 Moonshadow. And there's a lot of layers to this, and I'm not going to be able to go into all of the layers in this short presentation. But I want to talk about a few of them. So the first one is this name, Moonshadow. And so, well, first off, to talk a little bit about sort of the actual creation of the piece. So it's a very large spacecraft that I created, a solar sail, which I'll talk about a little bit what this is in a moment, 4 meters by 4 meters. But the title of this project relates to this, the Moonshadow newsletter from the 1970s. And this newsletter was created by what was called the Transsexual Action Organization, or the TAO. And the TAO was a group of transsexual women in the 1970s who were sharing information sort of, amongst themselves through zines and everything like that. And so in this zine, in this magazine, they were basically talking about how there are potential relationships between transsexuals and extraterrestrials, and thinking about the ways in which there's a certain type of prejudice and so forth related to transsexuals in the 1970s and extraterrestrials as well. But also in that were representations created by a woman, Susan David, and you see one of them right here, imagining transsexual women as extraterrestrials or as robots and so forth. So this is relating to a long history of practices of different types of marginalized groups thinking about leaving the planet of Earth in order to go to a place that might be seen as more hospitable to them, namely outer space. And so as part of this project, I was also researching this phenomenon and practice of what are called solar sails. So solar sails are very large reflective surfaces that allow you to travel in outer space without needing any chemical propulsion. So the idea is that you use the photons from the sun, which don't have mass, but they have some momentum. So they can reflect off the solar sail and then cause the solar sail to move in space without needing any chemical propulsion. So it basically bounces off these huge reflective sails, which are sometimes on the order of 10 meters by 10 meters, and then, allow that as a form of propulsion. And this has actually been tested in a few cases. This is done by the nonprofit Planetary Society. Japan sent a spacecraft called Icaros to Venus. And there's also been some, interesting practices of creating CubeSats, which are very, very small satellites on the size of, say, 10 centimeters on a side, or in this case, the size of like a shoebox or something like this. And so we get to sort of the conceit of the project, which is that my previous work was thinking about, okay, how might I get myself as a human to outer space? But in this project, I'm thinking, well, sending humans to outer space is kind of silly right now because outer space is a very complicated, dangerous, horrible environment for the human body. Basically, we need to transform ourselves before we go to outer space. And there's an interesting history in the connection with the word cyborg to this from the 1960s, where the original definition of the word cyborg was about thinking about how we need to transform ourselves for space travel. Very interesting history if you want to look it up. So instead of thinking about sending humans to Mars, I thought about, well, what about other organisms, like lichen? So basically, lichen is a symbiotic organism that consists of fungi and algae or cyanobacteria. Lichen grow on all sorts of surfaces around the planet Earth, on rocks, on trees, on metals, on human-made materials, and so forth. They grow extremely slowly. They sometimes live for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so those are just some examples of lichen photos that I've taken on various research trips. And in this image right here, you can see a cross-section of lichen that I took for some of my research. And so basically you can see on the outside sort of the more yellow and whitish parts that are the fungal parts, and then sort of small circular parts, which are the algal parts. But the interesting thing with lichen is that there's been various research done by the European Space Agency and some of their partners that have shown that they can put lichen in outer space. And so what they did is they sent lichen up to the International Space Station, put it on the outside of the space station for a year and a half, exposed to the ravages of space, so hot and cold cycles, vacuum, everything like this. And it was a particular lichen by the name of Xanthoria elegans that exists in the Arctic. So they put it up there for a year and a half, brought it back to Earth, and 70% of the cells were still viable. So they still were able to exist in outer space. And so this relates to the second part of my title, which is panspermia. So this is the idea that life did not actually originate on planet Earth, but originated somewhere else in the cosmos, maybe not even in our solar system, and was sort of ejected from that planet by an asteroid impact, maybe encased in some rock. That's the litho part of my title, Lithopanspermia. So encased in some kind of rock, which then sort of travels throughout the solar system for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, and then lands on Earth and perhaps starts life here on Earth. So for this project, I basically was saying, well, what if Mars is not for humans, but rather is for lichen? And so this is sort of a provocative proposition, especially for the scientists, and we can talk about that in questions if you're interested. But basically, the idea here was to create a spaceship that would travel throughout the solar system for 500 years to 1,000 years or so, and then eventually land on Mars in order to have the lichen be the organisms that go on Mars instead of the humans. So I basically created this 4 meter by 4 meter sculpture here, solar sail, with a CubeSat at the middle. And the idea is that the solar sail folds up into that small CubeSat up there. And these are just some images from an installation as part of the Rewild exhibition at MAXI in Rome. And so it's important to say, for many reasons, that the solar sails were all handmade. And so this is me working with my expert fabrication assistant, Georgia Pifaretti, who also helped me with the videos as the videographer. And so it was very important for us that this is an all DIY, open source project. And so we fabricated the solar sail, we fabricated some of the tape that was needed for this, because some of the tape that is actually used in creating these solar sails is considered a munition and is illegal to export from the US. So we had to fabricate it ourselves. And so these solar sails fold up into something very, very small. So this is one of the top solar sails, and it basically unfolds into these very large sheets. And these sheets are mylar, basically the same things that are used to create, say, helium balloons and so forth. And mylar is actually used in some of these solar sails, but some of the more advanced solar sails are using new types of materials and so forth. And so as part of the installation at MAXI, I also had a number of vitrines that were talking about various aspects of the project, including the moonshadow aspect. We used different types of AI image generation to create sigils for trans and queer protection, which then sort of created the framework of the satellite, some of the structural support. Basically, I'm very obsessed with this project, so I was basically creating the entire mission that was needed for this, including the ground station for telemetry and data from the spacecraft, creating all of sort of the equipment for this. And basically, we were building this to NASA specifications so that even though it's not going to space right now, it has the possibility of going to space. Also imagining what Mars would look like if lichen eventually landed on there and were able to have a chance to grow. These are just some images of the spacecraft. I worked with the Chilean industrial designer Felipe Rebolledo. And so as part of this, here are some of the sigils. Oh yeah, and there's another part here, which I don't have much time to get into, where I was thinking about how do I actually send the lichen there. Well, there's this way that you can simulate Martian soil. And so I was thinking about using this simulated Martian soil that is used for research purposes to create different types of meteorites, perhaps, to put the lichen in. And then finally, I don't have a lot of time to go into this, so I'll just mention this briefly, but I created a panoramic video to explore some of these aspects of the project, including these questions about colonization and so forth, but also looks at the actual process of assembling the spacecraft in a panoramic form. And we specifically shot it in a particular way so that you don't get a huge overview of things, because we were sort of going against that idea of the Hararian God's eye view and sort of pushing against sort of this top-down perspective of things. So we were getting very intimate with this practice. And so if you're interested in watching this, you can send me a message or something, and I can send you a screener link. Maybe I'll just show a bit of it briefly so you can see a little bit of what it's like. It's also presented in an essay film sort of style.
The irony of being obsessed with solar sails in a project about decolonization is not lost upon me. If anything, massive sailing vessels were one of the most damaging technologies of the age of colonization.
So I'll just quickly go over that. And this is an image of it being shown at ZKM in their Panorama Lab. So if there's, and this is all related to my practice of xenology, which is sort of the study, analysis, and development of the xeno, which you can find more about in the book that was talked about in the previous presentation, Art as We Don't Know It. And so I'll just thank a lot of the people who helped out with this. This was a very massive project, so there was a lot of people involved. And I'm open if we have any time for questions. Thank you.
I want to know now what the next stage of the project will be. Actually, that's the big question I have.
Yeah. So, if you read in the abstract, that was about making lichen-human hybrids, and that did not happen because this was basically a short-term project, 6-month project over last year because of the STARTS residency. What I want to do is I want to have the lichen that I might send to Mars grow on fragments from human materials, basically providing the substrate for the lichen to grow on, like, fingernails, hair, and things like that. So, and I want to collect it from people who are normally excluded from space travel, so LGBTQIA people, people of color, differently abled, and so forth, as a way to have a symbolic travel to Mars without necessarily engaging in the practices of colonization there. So I'm exploring that. I'm also exploring how to actually develop the trajectories for travel to Mars over a very long time scale. Turns out it's a very interesting research problem that no one has really done, because most of the time they're trying to send spacecraft as quickly as possible somewhere else or with the lowest amount of energy cost. But I'm interested in how can we think about very long duration space travel, especially if there aren't humans on board. And so that's actually a very interesting and challenging research question. So if anyone is a rocket scientist or space mission trajectory planner, please talk to me, or know anyone who is, because I've been trying to figure it out myself, but it's a little bit difficult. So.